Not too long ago, I recorded a video called The Most Underrated Chess Opening about the Kali system, and you guys enjoyed it. I received a lot of positive feedback about it, the video got a lot of views, and therefore I decided to continue this series. And we're gonna explore another greatly underrated chess opening. By saying underrated, I mean that it's usually not used, not played, and yet it's a strong opening. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. And therefore, when you play it, you've got a great chance to catch your opponent off guard and to get a quick win, or at least a very great position out of the opening. So today I'd like to share with you the bird opening, which is the first move pawn f4. And pretty much no one plays it on the very high level, because yeah, if you're playing this against Magnus Carlsen, that's probably not a good idea. But playing it on amateur level is perfectly fine. And I just checked the statistics for this video, and the vast majority of players playing this as black completely don't know what they're doing and react very wrongly. And you've got a great chance to play this with great success as white. So usually black responds here with pawn d5, which makes a lot of sense. Since the f4 pawn controls the square, therefore black can't easily move their e-pawn forward, or else that it would be captured, so they decide to move their other central pawn forward and they play pawn d5. Now you play knight f3. The great benefit of this bird opening is that you always play the same setup no matter what. No matter what your opponent does, you're always having the same setup. And the second great advantage of this opening is that it gives you a very clear and powerful attacking plan for the middle game, how you can attack opponent's king. So for these two reasons, I think that it's a great opening for you, and that's why I'm saying that it's greatly underrated, because mostly people are unaware of it, and very often your opponents will know zero theory about this opening. Okay, now they usually play pawn c5 with the same intent to establish their control over the central squares, and you continue pawn e3, giving space for your bishop to be developed, and now they go usually knight to c6. Which is already kinda wrong. It's not a blunder, of course, it's not that black's position falls apart after that, but it gives you this bishop b5 move, which you're gonna play, and it gives you some additional attacking opportunities later on. That's why I'm not a big fan of this move knight c6, and yet majority of your opponents who haven't watched this video will play exactly like this. Now, thanks to this bishop pressure, you're pinning the knight. Also, notice that you've got this pretty strong control over this e5 square, and your knight can always land there and put even more pressure on this knight. You don't have to play right away, but you always have this opportunity available, and together this already creates some first attacking opportunities for you. Anyway, black usually goes bishop d7, and now you play pawn b3. Another great idea. It's quite clear that your dark squared bishop is passive along this diagonal, right? There are all these pawns which are blocking the way of your dark squared bishop. That's why you want to move it to the other direction. You want to fianchettoed the bishop over here to b2, and after that it will become an extremely active piece along this diagonal, and assuming that black will castle kingside, which will probably be the case, your bishop will start attacking the black's king later on in the game. Another great thing that I love about playing b3 at this point is that playing b3 and then bishop b2 very often transposes this into the exact same positions as playing b3 on move 1 at the very beginning of the game. And if you follow me for some time, then you know that I actually love this opening, pawn b3 on the first move. And here, after you play this, again, very often you get either exactly the same or a very similar position. That's why I would certainly recommend that you check out my video about the b3 opening, because this will complement this bird opening really well. Now, black usually goes here pawn a6, which already indicates once again that your opponent is not the brightest bulb in the box and probably isn't aware about the theory of this opening. What's the point here? Well, your bishop here on b5 does not really have any other option other than taking on c6 at some point. And that's why pawn a6 is kind of a waste of time, because probably white would take there at some point anyway, on their own, because there is not much, other option of what this bishop can possibly do. So a6 is a waste of time, but again, great for you that your opponents are unaware of it, so you just take on c6, they recapture, you play bishop b2, now you've got this great bishop along this diagonal, awesome, black goes knight f6, you castle, and at some point you land your knight on this great central square e5. This knight is so well protected, together with the pawn and the bishop. Also, there is no easy way for black to somehow push this knight away, and the knight is extremely active, attacks a lot of squares in the black's position, Definitely a very annoying piece for black. Also, potentially you can grab there on c6 and double black pawns. That's why very often your opponent will actually play queen c7 here. And then you just continue your development. You play pawn d3, which is part of your usual setup, okay? We want to develop this knight, but you don't want to put it over here because that would block the diagonal for your bishop. That's why you want to play d3 first, and then your knight can be developed on the square d2. So let's say black plays any move, bishop d6, we're going knight to d2, and in this position, if black castles, funnily enough, this position is already winning for you, even though we're going over the main line of this variation, meaning the most played moves by black. Isn't that cool, right? By the way, before I show you the winning moves here, you can just picture in your mind the current setup of the white pieces, because that's what you're going to do no matter what. No matter what black does, your setup is always the same. And this setup is great because this bishop, together with this pawn on f4, which allows you to bring your heavy pieces there on the queen side, let's say like this, or instead of the queen, you can bring your rook like that on the king side. So it gives you this space to maneuver around and to bring more pieces towards the king side and to attack the black's king over there. So that's the middle game plan you've got here. In some positions you can even push your g-pawn forward boldly and start to attack right there, but that's more exceptional. Usually it's better to just bring your heavy pieces out, something like this. But in a position like that, you've got almost a forcing win here. First you trade there on c6 to open up your dark squared bishop. After that you grab on f6 because this disrupts the pawn structure around the black's king, and now you play queen h5, bring your queen closer to the opponent's king, and as simple as that, you're just gonna play rook f3 on the next move, and then rook g3 or maybe rook h3, and black has no way to stop this very simple attack. I mean, it's simple, but it's effective and it's a winning attack because there is nothing black can do against it. If black tries something like king h8, which is a standard maneuver in similar position. So if you go rook f3, trying to play here, and then queen takes here, checkmate. The only way for black to stop this would be going rook g8, trying to get their rook closer so that it can defend something. But the drawback here is that your queen can now capture this pawn, so they lose the pawn. Also, the queen simultaneously attacks these two pawns, therefore you're going to grab one of them on the next move inevitably. You still have the attack here on the king side. You can play rook h3, threatening king, and it's quite clear by now that black's position starts to fall apart and white will have at least two extra pawns on the next move. So that's clearly winning, and what's again super great about this line is that we're talking about the main line of the opening, which is highly likely to happen in your games. Now when we know the main line, let's explore a couple side lines, and little spoiler, you're gonna play the same moves all the time, no matter what. But anyway, let me show this to you. After f4, they will usually play pawn d5, you play knight f3, and they will usually play pawn c5. Now you go pawn e3. Now here's the first question. What if they don't go knight c6? As we discussed, going there allows you to play your bishop out, which puts some pressure on black already. What if your opponent is smart enough not to play this? Let's say they delay the development of their queenside knight and play knight f6 first. What do you do then? Well, then you just start by playing pawn b3 and then pawn b2 and you wait. Sooner or later, your opponent will anyway need to develop their knight, and as soon as they do this, you will then land your bishop to b5 happily and you transpose into the main line. Here's another question. Sometimes your opponents will not play c5 at all, but will develop their knight to c6 right away. What do you do in this case? Surprise, surprise, all the same moves, pawn e3, followed by bishop b5. Nothing really changes. If your opponent lands their bishop to g4, that's another thing that may potentially puzzle you. What to do about that bishop? And the answer is nothing, you just play your moves. So you go bishop b5. That bishop on g4 does not do anything at all. This knight on f3 is very well protected, so if they ever take there, it's no problem. You just win their bishop against the knight, which is an advantage for you. So again, nothing really changes. By the way, if you're ever really concerned about this bishop and you want to do something, you can play pawn h3, kick it away, and also put a nice little trap along the way, because very often in similar positions when you play pawn h3, your opponent automatically moves their bishop to h5. But in this position it's a blunder, because you can keep chasing the bishop, and after g4, bishop g6 and pawn f5, the bishop is trapped, there's nowhere way to go, and you just win the game right away. So if you're ever annoyed by the bishop, you can play something like this and even win the bishop. But in fact, I would say that you can just ignore the bishop and do nothing about it, because again, that doesn't cause any troubles for you whatsoever. Therefore, instead of chasing the bishop away, you can just continue with your plan and play pawn b3. Just as always, all standard moves. When your opponent plays a6, you take there, then you play, let's say, castle or bishop b2, doesn't matter. Then you go pawn d3, you just put your setup again. So this is the exact same setup that we used against the position with the black's pawn on c5 instead of c7. We play all the same moves. If the black's pawn is on c7 instead of being there on c5, it's even better for you because the pawn is more passive there, it doesn't influence the center, so your position is even greater here. Now at this point they will play pawn c5 anyway, and now there is another very common maneuver which is worthwhile to remembering. You gotta play queen e1. Now what's the point? First of all, you unpin your knight so that the bishop does not pin the knight anymore and the knight can move. It can land to e5. That's the first idea. The second idea is that your queen is ready to jump over here and to start putting pressure on the g-file to the bishop and indirectly to the king, because you've also got this extremely powerful bishop standing on b2, and together the queen and the bishop can create some checkmating threats along the g-file. Now, like goes pawn c6 here, I don't really know why, but they do. You go knight e5, attacking that pawn, attacking the bishop. So they go queen c7 to defend the pawn, and now you play queen g3. Now the bishop is attacked twice by the knight and by the queen. It's defended only once by the black's knight from f6, therefore the bishop has to go. And now you play rook e1, bringing your last piece into the attack and preparing central advancement pawn e4. Now, when they do something, let's say pawn a5 or whatever, you do advance your pawn in the center, pawn a4, and it starts a very strong attack here. Let's say they trade, the bishop is attacked, it has to go somewhere. If it goes back, you keep pushing, you just go forward, f5. It's quite clear that all your pieces came together really well, and they all point towards the king side, so it's quite clear that you're probably gonna win very soon, and you're gonna have this checkmating attack here. After black takes on f5, white could just recapture, and white would still have a great attacking position, but in this game white found a tactical shot, knight takes g6. It turns out that it's also a discovered attack to the queen, therefore black decided, okay, let me trade queens first, but white said, wait a moment, instead of taking here immediately, I can play an in-between move, knight takes e7 check, and because this is check to the king has to move, and white won this extra time to grab the bishop. And now after king h8, white can then recapture the queen, but at the end of this line, white has two extra minor pieces, a bishop and a knight, and therefore black can safely resign. So that just goes to show you the very typical middle game attacking plan, how you can crush your opponent with very simple, straightforward moves. Here's the puzzle of the day. It is white to move, checkmate in 1. Please think about it, and if you can't solve it, then write down the solution in the comments below. I'm curious to see. Even though it's checkmate in 1, it's a bit tricky, not that easy to figure this out, so I'm curious to know if you can solve this. Also, if you want to bring your chess to the next level, then feel free to attend my free masterclass, The Best Way to Improve at Chess Instantly, where we're going to explore not only how to play opening right, but also how to easily find the right plan in any middle game position. Thank you very much for watching. Talk soon.